how should we handle missing values in our data set? Unfortunately, this is a rather common problem. Data collection isn't gonna work out 100% of the time. There will be some errors in data collection, so we'll have observations in which certain features were missing the value. What are certain things we could go ahead and do to rectify this problem, to go ahead and have it come up with a solution to this situation? Well, one approach is we can take our data set and just throw out all the points in which we're missing information. While this might be a very simple way to go about it, it could be effective, or could, doesn't really have to be the worst thing we could go ahead and do. But this might be a problem if a lot of observations are missing values. That might be a problem because we might go from a data set, let's say 1,000 observations, so let's say 500. We might truncate our data set by half. And that's a problem because that might hurt the performance of our model. Our model's performance is controlled by how many observations it was seen. The more examples it sees, the more likely the model will perform better. So we don't want to just throw out observations in which we're missing values. We want to still preserve them. We still want to keep them in our data set, in our training set. So one thing we can do is let's go and fill in those missing values. But then the natural question arises is, well, what value should we replace it with? Should we replace it with 0? Should we replace it with 1? How should we replace those missing values? So that's what we're going to talk about in this lecture here. Now in our workflow, where do you think this replacing of missing values, where do you think it will occur in our workflow? Oftentimes it's going to be one of the first steps that needs to happen. We have our data set, it's missing values, and then it'll go through a step that's going to fill in those missing values before it goes downstream, before other sets of transformations. Since this is a common task where we have to fill in missing values, scikit-learn has a transformer we can use to fill in those missing values. So let's go ahead and play around with the data set. Now I uploaded this data set a while ago, so let's go ahead and load it up. So I'm going to do this in pandas. So let's go ahead and load the data set in pandas. Import pandas as PD. This is import numpy. We'll probably use numpy later on, so let's go ahead and import numpy as well. I'm going to say data frame equals PD read CSV, and there's a data set called Titanic. Let's run that. Let's look at our data set. Alright, these are our data set. These are features for our data set. So what this data set is used for is, can you train a model to predict whether a passenger would survive the Titanic disaster or not? We have features like what cabin they were in, their name, their sex, their age, how much they paid for the ticket, things like that, what port did they embark in. Now this data set has a lot of missing values. In fact, we can go ahead and investigate some of those missing values by doing isNull. So isNull calculates the sum. So this will tell us the number of missing values we have for each of our columns. So a field like age has a lot of missing values. It's got 177 missing values. Let's see what's our shape of our data set. I'm going to look at the shape of our data set. And it's 891. So yeah, so quite a few observations are missing. So we could throw them out, or we can go ahead and try to fill in the missing values. Now let's talk about what's a good value to fill in. Should you fill in 0? Well, the example I like to give people is, let's say you write a name. You write a name of a person, and you tell me I have to guess this person's age. And let's assume there's nothing about that person's name that can be indicative how old they are. I know some names are less popular nowadays compared to other names, but let's say I don't have that information. I don't know that I can't exploit that phenomenon. Then my best guess is I shouldn't guess. First of all, I shouldn't guess they're a newborn. In other words, I shouldn't say a 0 value. Or I shouldn't say that they're 90 years old. Because I understand that a bulk of our population aren't newborns or not people older than 90. So what I should use instead is maybe the median of the population or the mean of the population. Maybe I should fill in those missing values by using the mean or the median. Shouldn't use 0. Unless, well, if 0 makes sense, if 0 is a common value, then sure. But in general, using something like the mean and the median is a better approach. So let's play around with this tool. So from sklearn, pre-process, and let's import imputer. Now the first thing you should do every time you're going to learn about a new class, a new estimator in scikit-learn, is let's look at the documentation. I can't stress how good the documentation is for scikit-learn. So we look at this imputation transform for completing missing values. Okay, this is what we want here. So we see here, this is the missing value, what it's going to be considered as a missing value for our transformer. Let's focus on strategy, the imputation strategy, kind of like what we discussed just earlier. So we can have things like replace it by the mean, the median, or the most frequent. So we have different options for this hyperparameter. So let's go ahead and construct our workflow. So let's go ahead and try it out. So I'm just going to pull out the age field. So I'm going to say, we'll only focus on age. df head, age, assign that to x. Let's do values. Let's return the numpy array for that column. So x, all right, there is my array. Let's investigate the shape. Okay. But now I look at my shape. If I want to use this, I'm going to reshape it. I'll do that later on, but if I want to use this for a machine learning model, that's the only feature I have to reshape it. So let's go ahead and use the imputer. So I'm going to call that imp equals imputer. And there was a keyword called strategy. Let's use the mean. Let's go ahead and first, let's see if this makes sense. Let's go ahead and take this age and calculate the mean. So let's do it in pandas, because in pandas it will ignore those missing values. So we can just say something like this: print mean of age Okay, so the mean is about 29.7 and the median is 28. All right, let's go ahead and use the strategy of mean. Do imp.fit and transform. Let's pass our data set. Let's reshape it. Do 1 and 1. Call it x of t. We run that. Imp is not defined. Okay, there you go. Let's look at the shape. All our values are transformed. Let's calculate the mean. We take the mean of our data set. There it is. So we could have also changed the strategy and set the median. And there's our missing values. So it's a little hard to tell, but which fields were our missing values. But you can go ahead, if we look at our data set, see values of 28. Those were the ones that were missing. And now they've been replaced by the median instead of the mean. So I have that control, I have that capability. You might be wondering, well, which one's better to use? Should I use the mean or should I use the median? In fact, in the imputer, if we look at the documentation, you can also do it replaced by the most common. The most common probably wouldn't make sense since we have a numerical field here. Perhaps if you're working with categories, then the most common is probably the one to use. But ultimately, you have to decide, should you use median or should you use mean? Now, what do you guys think? Which do you think would be the better strategy to replace missing values, the mean or the median? But one problem with the mean is that the mean is susceptible to outliers. If you have a lot of outliers in your data set, that might hurt the resulting mean. That's why when people look at income, they look at the median income as opposed to the mean. So in general, I would say the median is a better strategy to use. But guess what? You can go ahead and view that strategy. It's a hyperparameter to the model. So perhaps your workflow is this imputer here, this imputer step, and then some other steps into our workflow, and this is an arbitrary complex workflow. You can encapsulate it via pipeline, and then perform some sort of search, some sort of hyperparameter tuning, in which you are allowed to modify this value here, the strategy here. You should use mean, or should use median, and then that's something you will let the grid search figure out on its own.